A north-south trade route with major economic implications.
Arizona needs to fight to keep its share of trade and to grow its percentage. And these are the types of initiatives that will help us compete.
The future of Interstate 11 and what it means for Arizona's landscape.
To make it a smaller footprint project so that it doesn't have the types of impacts that other infrastructure might have had in the past.
This is Arizona Week. The U.S. Senate recently approved a highway funding bill. In it, plans for Interstate 11, a corridor connecting Phoenix and Las Vegas. The long-term goal and hope is that the interstate will eventually link Mexico to Canada, key for commerce and trade. And I'm joined now by Mike Keys, the Assistant Director of Planning for ADOT. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's get right to it. I-11 is definitely happening, but it's a question of really when at this point.
That's true, yeah. Congress designated a portion of the corridor that we refer to now as I-11 and the Intermountain West Corridor back in 2012. And ADOT's been working these past years to forward the planning of a corridor that could be from Nevada all the way to the Mexican border. And so yes, we're moving forward with the planning, and there's a commitment that someday there'll be better trade flows from Mexico to Arizona and beyond, utilizing a corridor known as the Intermountain West Corridor. But you're correct, the timing of the implementation is not known at this time.
And let's clear up the confusion. Some people just call it the I-11 corridor, but that's not entirely accurate.
It's not, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Congress designated a portion of what we now call the Intermountain West Corridor as future I-11. Okay. That designation applies to Las Vegas, to Wickenburg, Arizona. So when we think of the northern section of the corridor beyond Phoenix, it is designated as future I-11. Okay. We're in the progress of working with the congressional delegation to see if they'll designate the rest of the corridor from Wickenburg down to Nogales as future I-11 also. But technically today, we call that part of the corridor the Intermountain West Corridor.
Okay, you provided us with a couple of maps, and we'll take a look at those. If you would kind of describe the areas that we're seeing. I mean, there are a lot of proposals at this point, so nothing is quite defined just yet.
Right, yeah, if you look at the map from Las Vegas down to Wickenburg, there's a solid red line. That is that designated part of the corridor that Congress designated as future I-11. We see following US 93 as the logical choice for that part of the corridor. But then from Wickenburg around Phoenix down through Tucson into Nogales, you see these larger pink shaded areas on the map. That is an area where we don't really know the specific alignment. We don't know what type of a corridor we'll be planning, and there's a lot more study work for us to do to get very specific about an alignment and the modes and the uses that will be used in that corridor.
And there's a definite connection to Mexico, and then we see as far north as Canada. So that is part of the long-term overall picture, correct?
It is. ADOT partnered with NDOT, the Nevada Department of Transportation. We did a 2-year feasibility study to look at the feasibility of this corridor, and it does make sense that we have a connection to Mexico, which Nogales is that logical connection, and increased trade all the way through Arizona to Nevada. And Nevada, as you can see on the map, has some ideas of how this corridor could move north to the Reno area and then beyond, and maybe someday as far as Canada.
Can you talk about the economic vitality component that is so huge with this plan?
Yeah, actually, Arizona Department of Transportation has a larger vision for the economic vitality of our state. We call it our Key Commerce Corridor Plan. And we looked at our state and identified those corridors that provide the most economic value to the state to connect us to our trading partners internationally and domestically, such as California, Mexico, Texas, those places. And we laid out all of these key commerce corridors, And the I-11 and Intermountain West corridor is one of those main key commerce corridors that starts in Nogales through Tucson, Phoenix, and then eventually to Vegas. And we see if we keep improving these corridors and improve the reliability of moving freight and trade, that'll bolster our economic vitality. Therefore, there's more jobs for the state, better paying jobs, and that helps everybody at the end.
There are some areas on the map where we see where maybe smaller communities may be affected by this corridor. What would you say to people who live in those communities? Because there have also been a lot of meetings surrounding the corridor, the I-11.
You're right, and one community that comes to mind that I know I've been involved in with a lot of meetings is Wickenburg, where the community really has a debate going on whether a corridor like this should be located outside of their town, essentially a bypass around town, or should it come into town and support the existing businesses that exist there. The same kind of discussions have been going on here in the Tucson area. Pima County has provided us an idea of maybe this corridor should be routed through Avra Valley as a new opportunity to move trade north and south around the Tucson metro area. But we've also had a lot of conversations with people that feel that the businesses and the people that are in the Tucson metro area should benefit from this corridor. So the next study that ADOT's going to do, which is an environmental impact statement, will really tackle these ideas of alternate routes or alternate ideas, how this corridor could be routed. And we're going to have those debates with people.
Can we talk about the financial component of actually fulfilling this plan and where it comes from and how far away is it really to fund everything?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of people get excited when we talk about these ideas of new transportation facilities. Our current funding model that we have available to us at ADOT today doesn't support these large corridors. We don't have the revenue to move forward with these corridors. We're really, at the Department of Transportation, a lot of our focus is to preserve the system that we currently have, and most of our funding goes towards that. So we're doing the advanced planning, and doing the advanced planning is always good so that people understand what we're talking about, potentially where this corridor could be located. But the funding to actually implement it has not been identified at this time. And once the planning is done, then the discussions are going to happen about where does the revenue come for this corridor.
The I-11 corridor, regardless of its final route, is expected to have significant economic impact on the Nogales border region, specifically for cross-border trade. Joining me to talk more about this are Allison Moore from the Fresh Produce Association of the Americas, Bruce Bracker of the Greater Nogales-Santa Cruz County Port Authority, and Luis Ramirez, who advises ADOT on this project. Thank you all for being here. Luis, we'll start with you. What's the status of the corridor project right now?
Well, the most important thing is that the corridor has been formally designated. I mean, that was quite a process that we had to go through. And ADOT has already identified funding and has already started the process to do a lot of the studies that are required in order to see this corridor come to fruition. The environmental impact studies are about to get started if they're not already underway, as well as some of the feasibility studies that have to be conducted for the project.
The studies process is roughly $60 million plus, is that correct?
It's up there. It's definitely in the tens of millions of dollars, but I believe they're going to be starting it in phases. So it's not like they're going to fund everything up front. It's a big study. Phase one of the project is really, people talk about the Phoenix area to Las Vegas, but it's really from the Wickenburg area, just north of Phoenix, to Las Vegas.
And Bruce, is there a need for a project like this one down in the Nogales region at the port?
Absolutely. What we're working on with the Port Authority is the economic vibrancy of the community. When you start talking about interconnectivity between Mexico and the United States, you have the $250 million investment from the federal government in the Mariposa Port of Entry, plus a subsequent investment from the state of Arizona on the roadways leading to the Port of Entry. This is just the next step in facilitating trade and travel through Mexico into our region.
Allison, how big of a need is there from the produce perspective of things?
I think with produce, we're looking out in terms of growth, and our position really is that we're looking to grow the industry, to grow U.S. jobs. So when you're planning ahead for that growth, we want to look at where are population centers that we want to service more, and it's looking at the Pacific Northwest. It's how do we get to Canada efficiently, and how do we really have routes that let us access the western part of the U.S. without the congestion in California. So this is really important, I think, for the long-term viability of trade coming through our ports of entry.
And there's tremendous interest about this when Director Helikowski of ADOT, Arizona Department of Transportation, has been down in Mexico City advocating for this project and informing people. You should see the level of interest from Mexico. They go, really? A new north-south corridor? Because they deal with the 5 corridor in California, in the state of California, and it's just so congested that they really are looking for those alternative routes to get to market. So there's a lot of interest in Mexico as to what Arizona and Nevada are doing on this corridor.
How involved is Mexico in this process right now?
They're involved from a perspective of they want to see when it's going to happen, but they're also investing heavily in the entire corridor. It's connecting the Arizona border through all the way down to the central Mexico and Mexico City and the state of Mexico. And in fact, ADOT is right now in the process of finalizing a memorandum of understanding to be signed between ADOT and the Department of Communications and Transportation of Mexico. We're hoping to have that signed before the end of September of this year, that will look at a feasibility study for the entire corridor from the Arizona, not just the border, but actually from the metropolitan areas, all the way along the major states that are connecting to Arizona. That's Sonora, Sinaloa, Nayarit, Jalisco, State of Mexico, and even looking at some of the states that benefit from that, such as Guerrero and Michoacan.
Okay. Bruce, when he says Mexico's investing heavily, you nodded your head.
Absolutely. And it's critical for everybody to understand that this is not just, we talk about I-11 in the United States, or we talk about I-11 in Arizona as an infrastructure project, but this is really something that encompasses Mexico, the United States, and Canada. This is something they talk about, replacing I-5 and an alternative to I-5, but we're also talking about an alternative to the Great American Highway that's being constructed in Texas. Arizona needs to fight to keep its share of trade and to grow its percentage. And these are the types of initiatives that will help us compete.
Allison, how much money are we talking when we talk about the produce economy down in the Nogales area?
Right now we're about, I would say, $3.5 to $4 billion industry yearly. That's on an annual basis. So we see anywhere from 1,500 to 1,800 trucks in a single day crossing the border from Mexico into the U.S. And that doesn't include the 3,000 plus trucks a day traveling on Arizona highways down to Nogales to pick up produce to distribute that across the country. So, it's a big deal. It's we're one of the largest private employing sectors in our entire county. That's a huge economic benefit for our county, our community. Trade is really what drives a lot of the economic health of our area, and so expanding that is very important to the people that live and work there.
If Nogales weren't the entry point, is there another place for these trucks to come through?
Well, you have the surrounding infrastructure in Nogales. You have the warehouses. You have the local businesses that specialize in logistics. You have people that their job is to handle and facilitate trade, and that's not just on a government function, but on the private side. So, Nogales really has grown up as this logistics and international business hub. It's a sleepy little community of 45,000 people that handles, with produce and manufactured goods, over $20 billion in merchandise a year. So, while we're a small community, what we do is very sophisticated, and it's, definitely international business at the highest level. So, looking at routes like I-11 and future growth and plans, those are things that really are important to keep us viable.
The other component is the maquila industry that's growing in Nogales, but also growing in Sonora and Sinaloa. And those goods also need to be processed and moved through the country. And the good thing about when you're talking about maquila and manufacturing in Mexico is that 60% of those component goods are coming from the United States as compared to when you're doing manufacturing in other places of the world. On top of that, you have all those people that also have the closeness to the border. Those people can also come up, because this has been a largely commercial conversation, but there's also passenger vehicle considerations too, just tourism and trade and travel.
Luis, you advise, I'm assuming, industries on both sides of the border. What are you hearing from the Mexican side on what they need to continue to come north with product?
Well, and I was tying in with what we were just mentioning, Arizona is facing growing competition from both California and Texas. They're offering alternative routes. And in fact, when we go to Mexico City and we visited with the states of Sinaloa and the state of Mexico, they've actually showing us diagrams of the connectivity to the US. And they show these great, beautiful lines on their maps to El Paso, to Laredo, and to McAllen, with no line to our border. And so one of the things that we have is a challenge before us that we have to let them know that our corridor is viable, it's effective, it's efficient. Arizona, not just in Nogales, but also in Douglas and San Luis, has invested well over $500 million in border infrastructure and the connectivity to the federal highway system in the US. We've been working extensively with the Mexican side because for companies, their focus is getting their product, their widget to market. And if they have a 15-hour wait at the border, they're going to go somewhere else. So one of the things we've been doing is communicating to companies in Sinaloa, in Sonora, in Central Mexico. You know, we asked them the question, when your truck gets to the border in Laredo, how long is it waiting to cross the border? Oh, it's going to be 4 hours, 8 hours, sometimes overnight. I said, how long is the wait how long do you think the wait is when that truck is going to get to the border at Mariposa, at Nogales? I said, oh, it's probably about 8 hours. I said, no, it's between 35 to 45 minutes. And that's the average time. That's the results of the investment we've had made by the federal government as well as by the state of Arizona and our federal inspection facilities and our connectivity to I-19 primarily. But we've also invested in San Luis, we've also invested in Douglas, because right now our competition is not Nogales and Luis, our competition is Arizona versus Texas and California. So we're competing with much larger economies, much broader infrastructure, because they've been investing longer and they have many more alternatives than we do. So what we're saying is Nogales and our ports of entry in the Arizona-Mexico border are more effective, more efficient than anything that is available anywhere else on the border. We have to get that message to those companies, though. Mm-hmm. If they still believe that our waits at Nogales are 18 hours or 12 hours, what it used to be a decade ago, they started going to other ports of entry. We need to get them back to Arizona so that we don't lose that market share that Bruce was addressing before.
And Bruce, it wasn't always that way, as Luis just said. I mean, it took a while to get to this point where the port was expanded.
Absolutely. It was actually a community-based effort that led to this expansion of the port of entry, led by the Greater Nogales-Santa Cruz County Port Authority. The current chairman then was Terry Shannon, and led by J.B. Manson, just advocating with the federal delegation and taking trips to Washington, D.C., and taking trips to Mexico City to support this infrastructure that was
But
finally...
you have to tell them how many times it told us no. We had to keep on going.
Oh, no.
And I think part of the dialogue in that and part of the message that got stronger and that people really understand is that infrastructure isn't just a nice road. It's not just a new building. Infrastructure investment actually increases your economic competitiveness and it drives your economy. So a road, from Phoenix to Las Vegas, or a road from Nogales into corridors in the U.S. isn't just a road. It's actually how your economy grows. It's how you make money as a business. It's how you expand a business, how you hire more people, how you service your customers and get the goods to them at the time that they want it. So infrastructure isn't just there and flat and static. It's definitely part of kind of this overall evolving economic growth and strategy in the U.S.
Allison, one of the hats that you wear with the organization is working with the legislature. Do legislators understand the need for this?
I think looking in the state of Arizona and also federally, I think people do understand it when you sit down and talk with them. I think there is a gap that exists between understanding what you need and figuring out how to pay for it. That's been a challenge for sure, trying to figure out how do we pass transportation funding federally? And I know the Senate just recently passed a transportation funding bill, and the House hasn't done that yet. But that funding question has kind of been kicked down the road a few times with temporary fixes. So we really need to decide, how are we going to fund transportation? How are we going to improve our infrastructure, as a nation and also as a state? To drive some of these economic benefits that we really need. So,
Bruce, so often we hear that Nogales, Santa Cruz County is kind of left off the map when it comes to matters happening in Phoenix. Is it true?
I think we've done a very good job in Nogales and Santa Cruz County as Port Authority, working with Fresh Produce Association, the Maquila Association, of really bringing the attention to what Santa Cruz County and what the border infrastructure means to the economy of the state. We've been able to forge terrific, great relationships with the City of Tucson, with Pima County, with Maricopa Association of Governments. We have brought all those entities together, supporting improvements on State Route 189, which is a component of what this I-11 is going to be. It's the 3-mile road that leads from the Mariposa Port of Entry to I-19. So we have a signed letter that supports, it implores ADOT to put this road on the 5-year funding to get the road up to standard so that trade and commerce can move on the road. So when you start talking about, does Phoenix understand what's happening in southern Arizona? I think they're starting to get the idea, and it's good.
Well, we had a governor recently led a trade delegation to Mexico City. And I think reflecting that, I think part of the message the governor, I was fortunate enough to hear his message several times in Mexico City. He highlighted the investment we've made in our ports of entry. He specifically talked about in multiple meetings about the investments that have been made at the Mariposa Port of Entry and at Nogales, and talking about the ease of flow for both people and goods at the Arizona border compared to other states. So I think, if that is indicative, I believe that is indicative of the governor. I believe he understands the importance of our border communities, the importance of our border infrastructure, because he's promoting jobs, he's promoting investment, and he was a tremendous advocate for Arizona when he was down in Mexico City.
Okay, and Luis, what's next on the project? What can people expect to hear?
Well, you're going to be hearing a lot more. I think there's a lot of discussion as to what the ultimate routes are going to be, but between starting the studies and the completion of the studies as to where the ultimate route is going to be, there's a long path to travel, excuse the pun. But for us, for those of us that are working extensively on the border, we want to make sure that any studies that are conducted on the corridor, on I-11, whether it's Wickenburg, Vegas, Phoenix, Vegas, or Tucson, all the way to the Canadian border, that it considers the impacts that it has on border communities, particularly Nogales.
And the timeline, still up in the air?
It's still up in the air. I mean, this is something you're looking at, between what we have now and what we hope to get. I mean, you're probably looking at 10 to 20 years before all of this is completed.
Okay, but it'll be worth the wait, it sounds like. All right, thank you all so much for your time, for being here.
Thank you.
For the opportunity.
The interstate system was completed in 1992, so it's been more than 20 years since such a project has been undertaken. The Sonoran Institute is an environmental nonprofit and is working with stakeholders as the project develops. Here's Ian Dowdy, director of the Sun Corridor program.
We are talking about a huge investment here. We're talking about investing maybe around $16 billion into a corridor that would connect Nogales through Las Vegas. The challenge, of course, with that is how do you anticipate the uncertain future? This is something that we do at the Sonoran Institute. We do scenario planning exercises with communities, and we help them understand how to put forward investments that'll be more long-lasting, that'll be more resilient to the future. And one of the goals here with having a multimodal corridor, one that can anticipate, a variety of different future development options in it, is it will be more resilient in the future. If we're investing that type of money, the key is to have multimodal aspects to it, to be able to put into it the types of infrastructure that might be appropriate 40 years from now. We can't tell what the future holds. So by having a multimodal, smartly designed, integrated, low-impact infrastructure corridor, we can do our best to make that investment the best possible investment for the future of Arizona, and that's the goal.
Is Arizona's landscape ecosystem particularly sensitive along this route?
It depends on where it goes. I mean, like any project, there are ways to do it that would be good for Arizona's ecosystem, or certainly lower impact to Arizona's ecosystem. There are ways to do it that would be a higher impact. Interstate 11 has an opportunity to take advantage of existing infrastructure. Interstate 10, for example, Interstate 8, State Route 85 through Buckeye, US 93 going from Wickenburg up to Las Vegas. So there are existing corridors that should be utilized for the I-11. But there are also opportunities where gaps in infrastructure could be filled. There are places maybe where a new corridor would be more appropriate for a lot of reasons. And so that's why they do the environmental impact statement. That's why they analyze it and they go through a process to make sure that all the alternatives are evaluated. And we're going to be involved with that in terms of looking at it and trying to evaluate it and make sure that the process is done in a way that really does a good, thorough, and transparent evaluation of all those alternatives.
Is it fair to say the Institute has endorsed the project, or is it too early to say that?
The Institute, we've done a lot of research. We certainly published our report. What we said in the report is the Interstate 11 could be a great thing for Arizona if it's done in a certain way. And we put 7 criteria that we felt the Interstate 11 needs to meet. And there are a variety of things. One of them is mitigating impacts for environmental damage that might come as a result of the highway. One of them is packaging multiple modes into that corridor. One of them is finding a way to integrate transmission infrastructure to move renewable energy to markets. One of them is having a transparent public process where they're working with diverse communities to try to find resolution to problems. So those are an example of some of the things that we feel need to be met, some of the criteria that need to be met by the Interstate 11 for it to be the perfect project for the state. And our goal is to try to advance it, to move it forward. Disengaging at an early stage is not the right thing in our view for the organization. We want to engage early, we want it to help inform the project, and we want to see a successful completion.
Are there any areas along the proposed routes at this point that you say, I don't think that is the right place for this?
Well, there are some, and I think in our report we detailed corridor by corridor. We went through and did some analysis, and there are areas that have some pretty high environmental sensitivity. One of the proposed alternatives, for example, goes over the Gila River through the Great Bend of the Gila, which is a really important site for archaeological resources, cultural resources. It's also a site where the old US 80 bridge, a historic landmark, exists. That might not be a good place for the Interstate 11. We think there might be better alternatives. But that's why we do the environmental assessments. That's why we evaluate alternatives and we rank them and use science-based information in order to make those determinations. And it's really too early to tell if any of the alternatives for the Interstate 11 are bad alternatives. That's why we do this process. And we certainly want to advise it to be the best possible alternative. But it's too early to say this is a really horrible idea and there are fatal flaws here or there. I think that's why we go through the process. And I encourage the communities and the people who are interested in I-11 and who have areas of concern that they engage in the process and they provide their input and they allow it to work like it's supposed to work.
And that's our program. Join us next week, what Tucson's Hispanic Chamber of Commerce found in a market research report. For all of us at Arizona Public Media, I'm Lorraine Rivera.